Welcome to Nowhere. I'm your host, Keegan Otwell. So this episode will probably be like an ongoing upture. It's essentially what the purpose of this episode is to attempt to get a snapshot of kind of this country and the homeless sweeps that have ramped up since over the last 6 months or so, since the Supreme Court decision in July to make it not a violation of the 8th Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment to outlaw public camping, aka criminalizing homelessness. So many states and municipalities have taken that as a opportunity, subject their homeless communities to repeated displacement. And so I'm looking through a lot of different news articles, studies, finding people to interview about this topic to see what it is like and how it's affecting communities around the U.S. So one of the scariest things about being a marginalized person, someone who society acknowledges they kind of have no responsibility to help, it's easy for you to slip even further through the cracks. And this is obviously in the context of people experiencing homelessness. So far, it can be kind of scary. If a homeless person disappears, there's not much that can be done or that is done. Someone from their homeless community is trying to report them going missing. There's just not much that's done. But it's like, if someone goes missing from their home and that's reported, that's a big deal. And this is because, police, they're always serving the people with more money. Many people who call people living outside houseless, and you're going to notice I use the word homeless not to describe a person, but to describe their experience. And that's because a home is somewhere we should feel safe, where we can sleep without one eye always open, where it is illegal for the police to walk in through the front door at any moment. Many who mean well call people living outside houseless, and I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with it, but I feel like this can, we can kind of fall into this trap of changing our language and then feeling better, feeling like we're doing something when we're not doing anything. Because you're like, oh no, you don't say that, say this. People can support the idea of helping them, but when it comes down to a lot of people, it's always just like this not in my backyard thing, No one wants a fucking homeless shelter anywhere near them, and that's happens all over the place. I'll talk more about that. But police across the country have been confiscating people's personal belongings and destroying them, which is ironic considering their job is to protect and serve. These publicly funded raids directed by private companies, if something like this was going on towards any other group of people besides the homeless, this would be considered destruction of private property, theft, harassment, when it's done in a large group, that people call it a riot, and when the police do it, they call it cleaning up the streets or doing a sweep. And you'll hear more than one, listen to interviews with people experiencing homelessness where they're just like, we're not trash, we're people. You can't just sweep us away and clean us up off the street, the problem remains. We'll get more into that. So yeah, police are serving the rich, protecting profit, and pillaging the poor. And I know most people get this, but there's a lot of factors that contribute to homelessness, and housing is getting more expensive, and, climate disasters like the recent wildfires in California. Along with that, there's this ever-widening wealth gap, which is a very good indicator of inequality, because you can see it, and, more and more people are losing their houses, and there's record profits, Record profits come with record poverty. This money isn't just getting printed off. It exists within the system of economy. And, for these rich people, Elon Musk, who's probably going to be the first trillionaire, that's money that's being taken from the working class, who's actually working. That's why they're called the working class. So, yeah, about these fires. So, I was actually out on the West Coast when, there's often fires that happen out there, obviously. They don't always make national news. When I was living in Medford, Oregon for a couple months, I came across some people who were displaced by wildfires. And there was this one man specifically who I talked to in depth, and I saw him on more than one occasion. And he had lost his home and everything he used to carry out his business. And his business, he was a landscape. And he told me this story about how he was a methamphetamine addict at one point and how it got him in prison when a drug deal went wrong. But he had, gotten his life back together. He, spent a very long time in prison, got out, and, got his life together. And he had, not many people get a fucking house, especially people who have been to prison and get out. So the fact that he had a house and his own business is a huge deal. He didn't have insurance on any of it, and when the fire came and took everything away, where I found him, he was staying in the motel where I went to get drugged. It was pretty much the worst motel in town. We would literally just, hang out in the parking lot and do drugs there. You knew that all the dealers who were supplying us, they had rooms over there. So here's this recovering addict who is placed pretty much in a motel where they sell drugs, and all he got was a $300 gift card, Visa gift card from the Red Cross. I ended up seeing him a few days later, and he asked me if I wanted to come into his room and do some meth with him, and so he had relapsed, and I turned him down. That guy's going to be on the street. He probably is on the street right now, and who knows what mental condition he's in, physical condition. It's just a story of, these people are coming from all over, and it is a very complex problem. Just another indicator that if anyone can become homeless. Because homeless people inherently just have no resources, no way to fight back, they become prime victims to the whims of municipalities all over the country. Currently, there are around 600,000 homeless people in the United States. So another way of thinking of that, so the city of St. Louis, within its entire metro area, there's about 300,000 people. So double that. 2 St. Louis's is the amount of homeless people there are scattered around this country right now. And it comes down to a pretty simple fact. You can't help living outside. Many people coalesce into these groups and communities in order to feel safe and have somewhere they can keep their belongings, like clothes, medicine, ID, you name it. They have a place that that the other people there know whose tent is whose, and that someone's not just going to run in there and steal your shit. Because that's another really big thing when you're homeless, being able to have somewhere to store your stuff, because you can't bring all your stuff with you everywhere you go. It's not possible for everyone to do that. Especially, if you're trying to work, and some of these people do work. I talked to someone in San Antonio who got swept. His wife lost all of their things in a homeless sweep, and they were both working, and she lost all of her work clothes, everything. It's ridiculous. So there's a reason why people coalesce in these groups, why it's really not safe to be spread out everywhere. It's quite ironic that so many people see these communities and homeless people as being subhuman. And people might not come out and say that, but I can see it in videos that people post online, using them for an internet video or by taking videos of streets filled with them and, having some sort of commentary like, this is so scary, I have to walk past this. And it's kind of ingrained into our society, the homeless guy in movies, and he's always the crazy, mentally ill, dangerous person. And that's how a lot of people who don't interact with these communities see every homeless person as, someone who's just not all there, is a phrase you'll hear a lot. And really, this is just a way to be able to feel like they are less than human because they're not all there. So you don't have to feel bad that they have to live on the sidewalk because you don't see them as human, really, because they're not all there. This stuff makes me kind of angry. But anyways, it's just ironic because these people form some of the strongest social bonds in our fucking country. While the upper class can barely get through a fucking Starbucks drive-thru without screaming at someone, So you tell me who's fucking subhuman. Anyways, it's forming community is the opposite of exploitation. The antisocial and oftentimes sociopathic ruling class are actually subhuman. They're people who are incapable of empathy, always manipulating the world around them to flex to their will, and like I said, the working class is called the working class because we are the ones doing all of the fucking work, while the ruling class sits back and focuses on exerting their control over more of the world, extracting more value from the world, and doing whatever it takes to get that done. And those who are homeless because they need a home, and the most basic form of that is being a shelter, but you need to belong to, that sense of community is very important. And networks of people experiencing homelessness within a single area serve as their own society. It's through the way information travels by word of mouth. It's how people are able to access resources. It's people who are there for all sorts of reasons. It brings all sorts of value that a regular community would bring, You have people to talk to, people you can trust, people you can rely on. You can feel safe. You can feel like you belong. These are important things that people need. And taking that away is going to be harmful to them, and it's going to make their homelessness worse. So, like most of I was homeless for 3 years, and I was all around the country. I experienced no shortage of interactions with the police. I think on average, I interacted with police probably twice a week. And the fact of the matter is, it's hard to find somewhere to sleep outside and get away with it. And, it's different. There were times when I did travel in a vehicle, and that made it easier. A lot of Walmart parking lots and things of that nature. But, over half the time I was on my feet, I was hitchhiking. And finding somewhere to sleep kind of becomes almost this kind of art form. Still catch myself sometimes when I see a nice grassy area or clearing tucked away somewhere within a city, like thinking that would be a good spot. Like the first night I was on my feet after leaving my broken down car behind, I had no fucking clue what I was doing. I literally slept on the grass slope of a curved on-ramp that led to an interstate, because that was like where I planned to hitch from the next day. Yeah, just insane. I mean, I think back to that and I'm like, yeah, that's not a good spot. But like walking into any city, you can usually get a rundown pretty quickly from one of the first homeless people you meet as to where good spots are, where to stay away from, what the cops are like. But this is all just to say, like, the act of simply going the fuck to sleep at night it can be a huge pain in the ass when you're homeless. It's one of the main reasons encampments exist and people choose to camp in groups is it's safer. This is a crucial factor for women and other people that might have to deal with, threats of stalking and sexual harassment more than others. And I'll say I was way more worried about upper class teenagers or some suburban sociopath attacking me in my sleep than I ever was of other homeless people. And if we cut through all the rhetoric of the issues of homelessness, the attack on homelessness, it comes down to a few very fundamental and seemingly simple concepts that most people can usually agree to. Most people think that others deserve somewhere to sleep, but not in their neighborhood, They do think people should be fed, but not near their parks where their kids play. And beneath this empty rhetoric and empty promises, you can sense and see this idea being reinforced that, people experiencing homelessness are dangerously mentally ill, unpredictable criminals and drug addicts. And the employed sees the existence of homeless people near them as a threat to their way of life. And it scares people. And this actually serves more than one purpose in our society, if you want to call it that. First, it keeps people fighting paycheck to paycheck to scrape by because what they really fear is becoming homeless, because they see it as becoming less than, subhuman. It is fear of shame and ridicule, that you might exist in a way where all of society can see your failures etched into your face, in the dirt and the clothes you wear and where you sleep at night. That fear of your failure being turned inside out for everyone to see. And this is because this is how they think. I'm not saying this is how it is, but people fear it because this is how they see it. They fear ridicule because they themselves ridicule people experiencing homelessness. And the truth is that, the very basic structure of our so-called society exists upon the foundation of capitalism. That is the engine at the center of everything that pushes and pulls and directs the world around it. And an aspect of that is competition, of valuing resources over humanity, of extracting the most value you can from every single moment of your life and commodifying everything that makes you a human. And we're all being fucked by the same system, and for some reason, we get angry at each other, fellow people in the same class as us. And, we think it's this idea that we're competing for limited resources, whether it's a job, a place to live, food to eat, Well, I digress. Anyways, dealing with police while trying to exist on the street was a constant problem, and almost every interaction was the same. We got told, you can't be here, with varying levels of anger and disgust. Can't be here, you can't drink here, all that bullshit. A lot of security guards, mostly though. I feel like it was a lot of like Walmart employees, Target employees, security guards, and it's just like, why do you care? Like, you work for Walmart, like, what do you think you're protecting right now? By, like, stopping me from loitering, which is a fucking another concept I could rant about for probably 10 minutes. Like, what the fuck is loitering? Like, who the fuck came up with that? Who? I'm gonna fucking find who came up with that. And it's just like, oh yeah, you're in a public place, but you're not allowed to exist there. Why? Because we don't want people using the public space that's public. We don't want people to actually be there. Don't ever fucking stop walking or sit down or, God forbid, try to fucking sleep. Now, with the homeless sweep, some of these sweeps are done under the guise of trying to help people. You know, that's what you always hear. More and more people are just losing what they need to not just survive. And, you know, it has this, like, subconscious effect on you. It's something I felt myself, where being told day after day, place after place, that you're not allowed to be there, like, eventually, it just becomes, you're not allowed to be. That's the message at the root of these displacements behind that law of loitering. Your existence has been deemed problematic because, you know, people don't like the idea of you as a human. People don't want to have to look at you if you're obviously homeless. You know, and like I said, we could get into super in depth into all the psychological fucking whatever pathological reasons why people are so terrified of poverty, which is, I actually have a name for this. There is a name for this. It's aporophobia. It's like agoraphobia, but with a P. Aporophobia is like a fear, phobia, disgust, hatred of poverty, of the poor. And it's something that, well, a lot of us in this country experience, inhabit. It's something that fuels us because, you know, you have to fear it. That's what makes the capitalistic society run. It's run on that fear of not being able to get by or survive or have a place to live and be safe. We have to ask why millions of dollars are being paid to non-government firms to sweep homeless encampments, when that same money could go towards trying to help homeless communities. And we have to wonder, as more and more studies come out showing that displacements aren't effective at reducing homelessness, what the motive is for the states and municipalities that are spending millions of dollars on contracts with private companies to sweep homeless camps. Which I'm going to talk about some of that when we get into the articles, but there's one sweep in LA that I believe costs like $3 million. Just one. And there's multi-million-dollar single contracts with companies to remove these people that have no money. You know, the studied effects of these displacements show that this scattering of people makes it harder for people to access resources, and people also lose things like Narcan in sweeps and medication, and more importantly, they lose the community around them that would be there to administer that Narcan. So the rates of overdoses, like, they increase when these camps are scattered. It's kind of just everyone to the four winds, and you're going off on your own. So people go and they use on their own. So if they overdose, there's no one there to see them overdosing, no one there to administer the Narcan, and more people overdose that way. You know, there's this quote that's like, at some point you have to stop pulling people out of the river and go upstream to find out why they keep falling in, which this is what, you know, the best programs do to try and resolve the root problems of homelessness. But what are these sweeps doing? It's the opposite. You know, they're on the shore kicking people back into the river, dragging them to the bottom. So is this the intention? Are they hoping that people will go off into some dark alley or patch of woods and just die? I'd really wonder, because there's plenty of studies out there that show the shit doesn't work, but they're still spending millions on it. Alright, I'm going to go from here and go over some articles to try and give you guys a taste of what is going on right now in America. And I have an interview with Valerie, who is the editor of the Challenger Street newspaper in Austin, which is a great little newspaper that's like 95% of their contributors are people experiencing homelessness. Yeah, because that's what the answer is to this stuff. It's not just about stopping sweeps, not just about someone having somewhere to sleep at night. It is about building up these communities, reinforcing these communities. Like, stopping the sweeps is what needs to be done right now. To do that, these communities need to be built up. They need to be cohesive. You know, it can't be all atomized. There needs to be some kind of community structure. And alright, get into that right after this transition. So, I'm going to start off this section with this quote from the United States Department of Justice. I don't know exactly what it's from. I know it refers to, cases in the past where our constitutional rights have come up in defense of criminalizing homelessness. And the date on this is August 6, 2015. So this says, it should be uncontroversial that punishing conduct that is a universal and unavoidable consequence of being human violates the Eighth Amendment. Sleeping is a life-sustaining activity, i.e., it must occur at some time in some place. If a person literally has nowhere else to go, then enforcement of the anti-camping ordinance against that person criminalizes her for being homeless. And that's what the recent Supreme Court decision has done, is criminalized the state of existence of being homeless. So we're going to look through some of these articles. We're just going to go through these, kind of look at it like a snapshot of what's been happening over the last year. Obviously, with stuff that's going on in the country right now, with our current administration, every day is something new. There's all these executive orders going out, and that's what most of the news is. And I feel like this is all stuff that doesn't stay in the news cycle. It's not a big item that people like to talk about, homelessness in general. People think it's icky. They don't like to be confronted with it. It doesn't make people feel good. That's our job as fucking consumers of media. We do have a job. We are an active participant of whether we like to think we are or not. We're not just passive observers in this world of ours, as much as we've been told we are, and as much as our news would have us believe. It's important to pay attention to this stuff. This is Stop the Sweeps, and this is a flyer from itsgoingdown.org. And I'll link to all this stuff in the show notes. The show notes is going to be pretty much a list of organizations and articles that I mentioned. This will be up towards the top because it's a useful flyer that you can print out and hand out in your local communities. The beginning of this says, dehumanizing, brutalizing, and profiting off people is central to capitalism, racism, and settler colonial power. Homelessness and genocidal displacement resides at the heart of this process. The path to a better world is made by those most profoundly impacted. Self-organized community survival is already a daily fact of life for most homeless folks. All the ups and downs of relying on others in the same boat. On the smallest scale, individuals and small groups of housed people can provide concrete support to the mutual aid folks are already doing. Understand that all our liberation is tied together. If you're housed, overcome your apprehensions. Talk to your neighbors at the nearby camp or squat. Find out from their perspective what assistance they need. A neighbor showing up to offer friendly help will be a welcome change from most interactions campers have. Get together with friends or neighbors. Setting up a weekly meal or supply distribution can provide a secure space for anyone who needs it. And this kind of goes on to just outline what they call a war on homeless people, but it's all about taking action. We'll get into some news articles. This article that I'm going to talk about first is written in April of last year by a man named Brian Barth. This article is very important to kind of see what's happening with the industry of clearing out homeless camps. So the headline for it is "Revealed How Companies Made $100 Million Clearing California Homeless Camps. Type Investigations." And this is from typeinvestigations.org. And yeah, the link will be in the show notes. And here's some quotes from this article. "In recent years, California has approved more than $700 million for funding of camp clearance, part of its strategy for grappling with a growing unsheltered homeless population of 123,000 people, according to a recent count." That's April of last year. So $700 million, that is almost, most of $1 billion there. That's a lot of fucking money. That is dedicated to clearing out these camps, to displacing them. And yeah, so here's another paragraph. The company Ocean Blue, for instance, says on its website it cleared out more than 300 encampments in a year in Southern California. Quote, "Because of our specialty in handling hazardous waste, biohazards, i.e. feces, urine, vomit, needles, oils, acids, aerosols, we now perform homeless encampment cleanups for some of the largest government agencies in Southern California." End quote. It says. And then here's some more from that article. "Across California, the largest single contract unearthed was a $23 million deal with the Singh Group, a major construction firm, to clear camps along state-maintained roads in the cities of Berkeley, Oakland, and Emeryville." So that's one contract with one company. So there's money in this. There's private companies in this. So already it should be a municipality and a state's job to look after its citizens. And those include citizens without homes. And the fact that they're bringing private corporations and businesses into this and paying them millions of dollars to clear out their camps without even being willing to expand their own services blows my mind. It's like if you look at what other cities are doing that have been doing this more successfully, there is stuff out there that works, and you need like a multi-pronged approach because everyone who's homeless have different reasons for being where they are in their life, and they need different things, and some are disabled, and some people do need help with mental health and addiction. But before all of that, what they need is to not be living fucking outside. That is what comes first. And here's one last paragraph from this article. "It can cost millions to clear a single camp. Marinship, a Bay Area construction company, received $3.4 million to dismantle an unhoused community with about 200 residents. The scores of contracts reviewed do not account for spending on the city employees and police forces that typically accompany private contractors on sweeps. The police presence at one sweep in Los Angeles cost an estimated $2 million. This article outlines the industry that has risen around these sweeps. The concept of paying a firm $3 million to clear a single encampment is beyond absurd. It really shows that the surface level reason given for clearing these camps is bullshit. It would cost less to put people up in hotel rooms in some of these cases, although that's also not a long-term solution. The truth is that these cities and states have no interest in doing the work of creating services that cover many different things to help prevent homelessness. We need to realize, with the money and effort that's going into this and these displacements, the plans that they have are not to help, but to try to remove the problem. And that quote-unquote problem is human fucking beings. We have to wonder how this will escalate, especially over the next 4 years. Displacement of people and the criminalization of the existence of a certain class are clear signs of fascism. It doesn't matter if Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is a so-called Democrat. He was happy to use the Supreme Court decision made by a Republican-dominated Supreme Court to remove the protection of the Eighth Amendment rights in these cases to his advantage. Within days, he made an executive order within his own state to get rid of these camps. Then there's this other article, Atlanta City Council to vote on moratorium for homeless encampment sweeps after man's death. So, in Atlanta, they were doing a homeless sweep, and they were using a bulldozer, and the bulldozer ran over a man and killed him as he was, I guess, sleeping in his tent. And, there's a lot of people who've organized around this. That just happened in January of this year, so like last month as I'm recording this. But yeah, it's just like for anyone who thinks that like they're going to these camps and like making sure, like going up to the people and being like, here, do you need a ride to the homeless shelter? Or like offering them some alternative form of housing. Like, they're not doing that. They're fucking bulldozing through. They don't even fucking look in the tents, I guess. At least in this case. And they fucking killed a man because of it. Yeah, this guy's name was Cornelius Taylor. Just fucking brutal shit. Yeah, here's a study from 2023. Researchers found that homeless involuntary displacement policies such as camping bans, sweeps, and move-along orders could result in 15 to 25% of deaths among unhoused people who use drugs in 10 years. Forced relocation moves people away from essential services, such as addiction treatment centers and safe injection sites, also resulting in more hospitalizations, overdoses, and infection. And these $1 million efforts to destroy that is like fucking evil. It's inhumane. So, getting to these last few articles, I'm going to start with this one by this website, Cal Matters. Let's see here. So this article is titled, Inside the Scandals and Abuse Pushing CA Homeless Out of Shelters. And this one is by Lauren Hepler and was published February 25th of 2025. And the byline on the website is, emergency shelters are supposed to be safe havens, but a Cal Matters investigation finds they are deadlier than jails, and the vast majority of residents remain homeless. So I'm going to go through some quotes now in this article. Okay, California spent big on a shelter boom. No state agency could provide an estimate for how much total taxpayer money is spent on shelters, so Cal Matters analyzed local contracts and state funding data. We found that governments have invested at least $1 billion since 2018. The number of emergency shelter beds in the state more than doubled, from around 27,000 to 61,000, federal data shows. There are still 3 times as many homeless people as there are shelter beds in California. So, this is where a lot of funding goes. The fact that at least $1 billion has been spent since 2018 kind of shows that the governments are still relying on the existence of shelters, and that kind of goes hand in hand with how they've been aggressively doing these homeless sweeps, because, they feel like they can do these sweeps because they can offer people a bed in a shelter, which that doesn't always happen, and not everyone can go into shelters. Here's another quote from that article. Dennis Colhane, an expert in homelessness and housing policy, calls outsized reliance on shelters and other short-term services the big failure in California. It's true, he said, that the facilities can be a lifeline for sick and older people who might otherwise die outside. But he worries about how officials prioritize shelters over other ways to deliver lasting housing, such as direct financial support. Quote, the shelters are not a solution, said Colhane, a University of Pennsylvania social scientist who has advised the city of LA, the U.S. Congress, and other public agencies. We have every reason to believe that if we scaled up income support and provided rental assistance, we would probably see the homeless numbers cut in half. Those shelters are deadlier than jails. Annual shelter death rates tripled between 2018 and mid-2024. A total of 2,007 people died, according to data obtained from the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. That's nearly twice as many deaths as California jails saw during the same period. This article does a really good job of showing why people don't go into shelters. Alright, I'm going to just keep going with this article. Scandals have plagued fast-growing shelter operators. Oakland's Bay Area Community Services saw revenue climb 1,000% in a decade to $98 million in 2023. At the same time, it faced a long list of allegations against staff at one taxpayer-funded shelter. including fraud and inappropriate relationships with clients. LA's Special Service for Groups brought in $170 million in 2023, a nine-figure jump since 2017, while drawing complaints and lawsuits over violence and sexual misconduct. This is really a disgusting level of how some of these people are being treated. You have so many people in their most vulnerable situation they've been in. You have people coming from domestic violence situations. Alright, and then here's a couple bullet points from that article. Oversight is failing at every level. While the state sends local governments hundreds of millions of dollars for shelters, it does little to ensure accountability. Meanwhile, audits and complaints show that the local agencies that directly pay and monitor shelter contractors often fail to follow up on reports of unsafe conditions, unused beds, or missed housing targets. The result? Shelters become a bridge to nowhere. California shelters fail to move the vast majority of residents into permanent housing. But even under the most generous formula, the state's shelters delivered housing for just 22% of residents from 2018 to early 2024. They often kick out far more people than they place in housing. Yeah, I have more quotes from this article, but I'm gonna just read this quote. Here's another paragraph. Shelter personnel gave taxpayer-funded housing to friends and family, the complaints alleged. Multiple people reported that staffers had sexually harassed or had inappropriate sexual relationships with other staffers or clients. They made detailed claims about how workers illegally bought food stamps from clients, manipulated shelter data, and forged program documents. There were allegations of nepotism and fake resumes in hiring, retaliation for raising concerns. And here's a quote from a man named Brian Samaniego, and he filled out 22 apartment applications through the Share Center. They sold me a fairy tale that it was going to be real quick when I got here, he said. It's not people that are failing the programs, it's the programs that are failing the people. And then here's one last really important quote, and this is from a woman there. And this is from a Bridge Home, the shelter in South LA. He was 3 months into his new shelter job when, in a single day, drunk Evans sexually battered 3 different women living at the shelter, according to court records and victims' testimony. Eventually, the victims did report the incidents to law enforcement. One said in court that she was kicked out of the shelter after she reported what happened. "You are one of the worst types of predators," one victim told Evans following his conviction, calling him a snake who devoured what little bit of existence that I was holding on to. Alright, so that is that article. It's pretty fucking mind-boggling, and will lend some context to this next article that's talking about the homeless sweeps. There's just failure by shelters on multiple levels there, but it's also, people don't like going into shelters. Shelters are truly like a last resort for most people. They're not always a safe place to be, especially if you're a woman, but these people are getting stabbed, people are getting beaten and all kinds of fights. People aren't safe from sexual harassment, and it's just really sad that these people are forced to try to get some help from these places. And if they want to get any form of housing, they're pretty much forced to live at these shelters. And they can only get housing after participating in their programs for, I think the average was over 220 days spent in the shelter to finally get housing. And it's just man, could you imagine with all this shit going on? It's you've definitely seen probably someone get killed in front of you by the time that time period is up. Yeah, it just, it sucks because shelters can save people, and they are really necessary, especially in locales where there's freezing temperatures in the winter. So with that in mind, we're going to go into this second to last article from the same website and this publication called Cal Matters, which is all California stuff, and they do some great investigative reporting. And the title of this one is Inside California's Crackdown on Homeless Encampments. And this one is by Marissa Kendall and Katie Anastas. This article is really showing how they are straight up arresting people in California, which California is one of the most, they're supposed to have this cushion, right? Where they're doing these sweeps, and there's supposed to be social workers there, and they're offering housing and shelter and beds and all this shit, and it's just not really the case. maybe even most of the time. And like, if you're already living on the street, chances are you don't want to live in the fucking shelter. Like, there's a reason why you made that decision. Have some sense of independency and your life on the street rather than within a shelter and within their system of rules. And then on most days during a 5-week span, CalMatters saw several people camped on each block despite frequent sweeps. The reasons for being out there varied. One man said he saw a fellow shelter resident get raped, and since then he's avoided all shelters. And then a woman they spoke with said she already had housing in a city-funded SRO, but she's a victim of domestic violence, and her abuser found out where she lived. So now she doesn't feel safe going back, so she's living on the street. And then they talk about another makeshift shelter further away, and that's where this Roy guy is living. And recently police told him he needed to pack up and leave his campsite, so he did. He was thirsty, whatever, needed water for his dog, so he pushed his cart over to this like convenience store like across from where he was camping. The police came in and arrested him like right after he moved, and they arrested him for camping. This is him quoted saying he spent about 4 hours in jail, just long enough for people to steal all his belongings from where he left them on the street. What was the whole point, he asked. What was the inconvenience about? So it's just, I mean, I don't have to even explain it to you guys, but clearly this is madness, like arresting homeless people. It's just like, what are they thinking? Like, what? And like all the money, the millions and millions of dollars going into these shelters, going into these different fucking like construction companies, getting these giant contracts to remove homeless encampments. And it's all for a system that doesn't even work, that fucking actively harms and traumatizes homeless people instead of helping them. It's fucking, it's not good. So this final article that I'm looking at here that I'm going to tell you guys about, and this article is from October of last year, and it's called "The Swept Away: What Cities Really Take When They Sweep Homeless Encampments." And this is on ProPublica, and this is kind of like almost an interactive project that has been contributed to by Ruth Talbot, Asia Fields, Nicole Santa Cruz, and Maya Miller, and the design and development is by Zisiga Mukulu and Ruth Talbot, and illustrations by Matt Rhoda. But this is here. I'll read part of this first part. As homelessness has surged to record levels in the U.S., cities are increasingly removing or sweeping tents or entire encampments. They say they do these clearings humanely with the goal of getting people off the street, but they often result in people's belongings being thrown away. ProPublica found, through reviewing records from 16 cities, reporting in 11 cities, and speaking with people across the country, that these actions create a cycle of hardship. And then they quote this man, Elijah, who was living in a tent near Hollywood when LA sanitation workers showed up. And he said he left to warn others nearby that the city was cleaning the area. He came back to find his tent and contents gone, and he had lost everything he needed for his job with DoorDash, his electric bike, his ID, and iPhone. And then if we look at the actual website, if you just go through, you can see what people have contributed, and there's logs of like what people have lost, and you can see like social security card, blanket and Bible, my seizure medication, baby formula, wheelchair and clothes, my husband's ashes, EBT card, hospital paperwork, unopened work shirt, cell phone, and this is like the way these sweeps are not only, dehumanizing, they are harassing people, but they're also actively making their lives harder and making them, like, having to have an ID to get resources, to get help is such a huge thing when you're homeless, and you always hear about so many people, if they're trying to access resources, chances are they're trying to get their ID. And losing that, like here's one person that lost their birth certificate, their passport, their UPS storage keys, money was taken, and their ID and social security card was lost. He says it set back my progress to saving for a place back months. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I really suggest, I'll link this article obviously in the show notes with the other ones, but I really suggest looking through this. It really puts a human face on these homeless sweeps and showing what these people have had taken from them. You learn that it's not, these people aren't the odd one out. This is like regularly what is happening is this shit is getting thrown away. And some cities hold on to stuff, but others say they do and they don't. Or, like when my friends got swept when I was in New Orleans, like they all lost everything. Actively setting people back, which you have to wonder when like this is all the same state doing this. It's like, okay, so you're actively setting people back by sweeping them. You have like a multi-million-dollar shelter system set up. Most of these people might need to access after losing everything. After you hear that article about what people have dealt with within the shelters, it's like losing all your stuff and then being like, well, fuck, now I have to go to the shelter, I guess, and fucking, be on edge. Like, I know what it's like to be around people and not necessarily not feel in danger, but just have to have that extra awareness all the time. And that awareness, that kind of like sense of like fight or flight mode, always being in that state of mind is like, it's traumatic to your body, to your spirit, to your mind. And it's something that a lot of homeless people go through. The millions of dollars in contracts, the scattering people, making them get further and further away from resources. You've got people dying in the woods and shit when that's happening. It makes it harder for, street outreach people to even find people to help them get housing. So this stuff really helps no one. It might make some residents a little be like, okay, well, I'm glad those people aren't here anymore. But really, it's like, that's pretty much all you're accomplishing. Like, unless you, like, are wanting people to be homeless longer to keep using the shelter system. But it's like, even then, though, that's like government funding that the government is paying those shelters. So why is the government wanting to exacerbate this issue? You'd think they would want to save money on this stuff. And like, why, they've created this fucked up cycle where it's like things need to be fundamentally changed here, and they're not being fundamentally changed. And Gavin Newsom jumped on the fucking Supreme Court decision, and he put out, he did like a statewide executive order for all homeless camps to be cleared from state property. So then you have like the dynamic of going back and forth between city property, state property, and the city people will run them off from the city property, and then they'll be on state property, and they're just shuffling them back and forth to get, and then different contractor will come out, or different police or outreach teams. It's just a never-ending cycle. It's madness, and this is happening all over the country. And these articles focus on California, but California is like one of the more lax states about some of this stuff, because there's nothing in the Supreme Court decision that says you have to offer people housing when you sweep them. That is something that California is doing to make it seem like they're trying to make it seem like what they're doing isn't inhumane, when it is inhumane. They always do this under the guise of, well, they need help, and we're connecting them with that help. And it's like, these people know where the fucking shelter is. They know where the shelter is. They don't want to fucking go in your shelter. Like, you're not helping them by taking away all their shit and being like, we have a bed open in the shelter. Like, did you even know we had that? It's like, yeah, fuck, dude, yeah. They know you have a shelter. Like, you're not helping them. It's absolute madness. I worry. I'm not gonna sit here and, like, try to predict too much, but I just worry with this new administration, and it's just like, Trump is, like, getting all these new young federal judges. There's a lot of damage being done that's going to last. No matter if there's a different president in 4 years, like, a lot of what's being done, even in these first couple months of his presidency, we're going to see that the outcomes of that for years and years to come. And so I worry about places that get federal funding. As I'm recording this, we're seeing, obviously, Doge is, like, dismantling the government in order to consolidate more power. And they're trying to, like, which I'm not going to go too much into all of that, because there's plenty of other podcasts and publications and stuff that can cover that more in depth, better than I can. But, within that context, it's it's concerning when this stuff is already going on in a democratic state. It's like, okay, so what happens when like the really right wing are really in control, you know? It's like Gavin Newsom's a so-called Democrat. It's like what are they gonna do? Like ship them off to fucking work camps? Like it's these warning signs of fascism that you really have to watch out for. And I know I've already said it before, but it's an entire class of people disappearing off the street, being jailed for being poor is not good. It is not fucking good. Yeah, I appreciate you guys just listening to this episode. I know it might have been a little bit more grueling than some other ones I've done. There's a lot of talking about articles, but we're gonna end this podcast episode on a positive note. And I'm going to share with you guys this interview that I did with Valerie, and she is the editor of the Challenger Street newspaper in Austin, Texas. I'm kind of putting this in here in the context of homeless sweeps because this is kind of what we need to focus on to not only we need to fight against homeless sweeps happening and defend those communities. But in order to do that, we have to build community in the first place. So, yeah, we'll get into that interview. I think it's like 17 minutes or so after I edit it. And so I will play that interview right now. The idea that you can have a place where people can, feel like they're valuable.
Be a part of a community. Yeah, the Challenger does that. They're more into the writing and being heard. The Challenger always lets people come back as long as they haven't burnt a bridge. Always open arms, like, hey, come back and just sit with us, hang out. And I could tell that they're into the community, like, oh, I get to sit and breathe now, being human together, and nobody's outright judging each other.
When you guys have had more problems throughout the years with like homeless sweeps, has the paper kind of offered a place for people to be able to come and organize like from there and like actually interact with the homeless community?
I would say so. A platform where they can work to be heard. Right out, I'm 70 years old now. I've been an advocate for 35 years since the NOM-vets. And I kind of have lost some of my steam in the last 10 years. So I've been passing the baton to younger people. There's a group now of people who are now 40. I started with them when they were in their mid 20s. They worked with the paper. Then I would share my experiences with them, show them camps that I've been in, and just kind of how to talk with people, just going with the flow of meeting new people. And that has worked really well then through the pandemic. Our city, the mayor decided to drop the camping ban in 2019. Then the pandemic happened just like shortly after. And so the city kind of just let everybody be out there because everybody was staying home. And the homeless people were completely abandoned. The churches went home, so the feeds stopped. Wow. There was no food. This guy and his friends that I was training, he had just left the paper. I could tell he was burnt out, and I thought he needs to just go do something else. Came up then, they started feeding, and all our homeless people were visible because they were under the overpasses for the rain and where they could be seen, and so food was delivered. There were 100 people delivering food across the city, and they got to know them all. And then our city voted some conservative people who wanted to save Austin, and they lied to people as they went to door and said, oh, we want to bring the camping ban back. We want to help the homeless people. We're going to bring the camping ban back because it's going to help them. And that's how they frame it. And we didn't really hear about that until 2 weeks before the vote, and it was too late to do anything. Any savvy person would know that, okay, this is pushing people back in the woods, back into where you don't want them, in the creek beds where they could drown, where it's hard for them to get rid of their trash in there. And now the Texas governor wants to sue a navigation center, a place that provides wraparound services, the Sunrise, wants to sue them because the neighboring church and school don't like the homeless people there. The homeless people were kind of disappearing. And then I moved south And then I started seeing people, and I'm like, Roy, what you doing out here? And he said, well, the cops were messing with me so much, I decided to leave the downtown area. He told me his story in Vietnam, that the kid had a frag. So he had a healing from that, being able to tell someone the Viet Cong sent their kids running out over the hill with a grenade, and you're either going to die or you're going to shoot a kid. So that really messes them up. So Roy couldn't function in society anymore because of trying to stay alive in the war that was for nothing. And then the police just kept pushing homeless people out of the downtown area, and Ben White got full, and then they started going to Highway 183, and then that's gotten full, and now it's just the whole city, anywhere you can find. Pandemic allowed people to have tents because the community did want them to be separate, have ability to be separated. So now it's kind of like, well, it's okay to have a tent. So tents pop up every. Our city was giving all the money to the Salvation Army. They're going to end homelessness, right? Your chuckle. So I was a volunteer haircutter in the early 90s there, and they didn't want me to invite chronic homeless people in to get haircut. I'm like, well, they deserve a haircut too for their self-esteem. Oh yeah, but they're not going to go find a job. And I'm like, oh no. So I start going to the other shop. Okay. So every Monday, I volunteered my time, and I did 10 haircuts for a year and a half. And I listened to everybody. And that's when I really started becoming a voice for the homeless. When you get a haircut, people, they just talk while they're getting a haircut.
Yeah. So I saw you guys started in like 2011, was it? The Challenger?
We did. We started a new paper. The other paper had it
Yeah.
was patriarchal. It was very macho. They wouldn't take my suggestion, and they would dismiss them and throw them away. So I got tired of that.
It seems like, well, your paper is mostly pretty much all the contributors are people experiencing homelessness or who have experienced homelessness, right?
95%, yeah.
So have you seen over the years like people kind of like get off the street through just being part of the newspaper?
Yes, yes, quite a bit. We lost our top distributor. He was selling 150 to 200 papers a month
Awesome.
because we changed our phrase. We said our papers on a donation basis. We don't have a specified price. If you say $2, they'll give you $2. But if you say, well, we're doing it on a donation basis, plus they're doing Venmo. Today's young people don't carry cash. So they're scrolling through there and their Venmo, and they're like, oh, let me give them 10 merchants that they know that want to support the idea of the paper.
Yeah, I'm really interested in just like I don't know, the whole concept in general. When I was homeless and traveling, I tried to like at some point start something that would have been a collection of other homeless travelers, but it's kind of just didn't really get anyone submitting anything. I've always felt like if you could give like homeless people something that they can be part of and be proud of, that it will help more than just, throwing resources at them. It seems like a very, I mean, it's a great concept, and I don't know, I feel like it just is a way better way to reinforce community.
What I find happens is it becomes peer to peer because I'm the director editor, kind of a facilitator. I just make that weekly meeting, trying to expand, but I make the meeting, I observe the room at the library, and then they run it kind of. I mean, I'll steer it. They end up talking with each other, and they're like, oh, and I just let them talk because I can't speak the street language like they can. So I was homeless for 10 days when I left an abusive boyfriend in 1985. But I've slept in a camp, have made friends with 50 or 100 of them over the decade, but I don't know current street life. I don't know like they know, and I can't describe it like they can. I can be a good mediator between the housed and unhoused when I can see housed people are like, what? I don't get that. And I can be a mediator to like, well, they mean this, means that. And then they don't get so stuck.
Really, the core of what I do, which is still relatively new, is just people's personal history. Because I just feel like the best way to spread compassion and understanding is just by sharing people's stories, you know? If people can hear what it's like, how people get from point A to point B. Huge part of my story is addiction. And like a couple of people that I interviewed, that's a huge part of their story too. But because of the Grants Pass, the Supreme Court decision, I live in a relatively small town, in Springfield, Illinois, and they tried to pass an emergency ordinance to outlaw public camping, and a bunch of us showed up to the city council and they ended up not doing it, but it was just like seemed like all over America, small to large communities and municipalities have taken that to take advantage of it and to criminalize their homeless communities. It's just like it's like the warning signs of fascism. And it's like if you're seeing groups of people disappear off the street, like that's not a good thing. That needs to be documented as best as it can be, I feel like.
2, 3, 4 years of the Challenger, I tried to get the media to cover us. And because the other paper had fizzled out so much that the community forgot that there was a street newspaper. And we don't have people selling 1,000 papers anymore. They're selling 200, if that. At UT, University of Texas College, we've had one or two people in the last couple of years want to interview us about how has the camping ban coming back affect
Yeah.
for their either their master's work or a project in sociology or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where are you guys in Austin right now with like camping bans? Are there any camps downtown right now, or is that all have they been kind of pushed out?
We have too many homeless people. They can't all hide. There's not enough room to hide. We don't have enough woods anymore. They've been developing the vacant territories because Austin's been growing so fast. They finally have expanded the count. This is the first year we're getting HUD funding to a considerable amount. They kind of cut off the Salvation Army because they weren't helping chronic homelessness. And Texas has a history of sending their homeless people to Austin because we're levy and Austin take care of it. Them loony lefts, shut down their community services. I hear stories. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm like, oh, okay, so you're new in town. Where'd you come from? And he came out from out in West Texas. I said, well, how did you hear about it? And he said, oh, they told me to come here.
Wow.
So then you start figuring out, oh, okay, smaller cities say, get your ass down the road, go to Austin, they'll help.
Yeah, that's
Most people,
very reminiscent of Texas. Like in Chicago, we've gotten busloads of migrant
okay.
people because they're like, "Oh, you're a sanctuary city. We'll just put them all on buses, and you can have them then."
That's Abbott's thinking. Governor Abbott is the one who put him on the bus. Now we got the Nazis getting the farm workers. They're taking them all to camps. Who's going to pick the produce? Well, I think it all stems back to mental health. I think we're just going to take a pause on helping people with mental health because that's too much for them. And but I think that's the root of the problem is if you can't do your inner child work, how do you change how you do things? So we just keep doing the same things over and over, and the cycles keep going over and over, and we're just spitting out homeless people. So yeah, the newspaper gives people a chance to write about their damn childhood story. Write about, keep it safe for 12-year-olds to read and church people. I mean, but I let them cuss. No F word, no isms. No sexism, racism, religiosism, classism. Don't hurt each other. But you can write about how you were affected by classist sex. That's fine to write about.
Like, I mean, it's one of those things where I feel like you can never really measure the exact value of how it helps the people involved, but I can only imagine that it's a massive, massive amount of value to a lot of people's lives. I don't know, just the whole concept of like, I guess that reinforcement of community or providing, like you said, kind of the facilitation of community and something to actually work on and put a piece of yourself out there is like, I've noticed just like interviewing like a local guy, just showing that interest, and sitting down with someone for over a period of a few months lets him know that like someone notices him at least and that his story is important. There should be a lot more of these out there. I think it's a really good starting point.
Yeah, the Challenger hasn't really been able to measure success because I know sometimes there's people who come and join us, get our starter kit for $1, and they sell those 10 papers and they succeed at what they were trying to do. They made enough money for a bus ticket or enough to pay the rent and prevent themselves from falling through the cracks. And then we don't see them. We don't have a way to ask them how it was, so I can only speculate. But then once in a while you'll hear stories. They'll come back and visit and say, "Oh, well, that made a big difference, and I'm glad that you were there." So, yeah.
Because that's especially like why I wanted to reach out to you too, is because trying to cover just the idea of homeless sweeps, it's like I feel like homeless sweeps are pretty much the opposite of what your paper does. Like homeless sweeps destroy, displace community, they scatter people, and that your paper kind of brings people together and lets people build community. And that's like what we need is more of that happening. Because it's not just about stopping the sweeps, it's about taking the community that's already there and reinforcing it and like having that point where people community can kind of coalesce around. Sometimes that's just a physical place too, but I feel like with your paper it's more, beyond a physical place. It's a, ideological space. It's a space where people can share a part of themselves, which is amazing.
Yes, it makes a big difference. We've been quite unique. Well, we're trying to finish repurposing a RV into an office. It's pretty old. It's like 1985. So I don't know that I want to drive it all around, and I'm too old to do that anymore. I don't have the stamina. But I found with the Advocate newspaper, wherever we were, the powers that be didn't want us there, whether it was a church or the shelter. And sometimes people have to yell. Sometimes street people have to yell. Sometimes they do. I can't stop that. I'll de escalate. Sometimes they misbehave. Well, a church wants them to behave 100%. We met outside forever. Now it's getting hotter here in Texas and colder. So we started meeting at the library and we lose some people. Some of the true campers won't come in. They're too paranoid to come in. But we've had a mobile office this whole time because of that happening with all the churches and getting kicked out and flailing around trying to survive that other paper. So I thought, let's just have a mobile office. Nobody can stop us then. We got to pick up or going somewhere else. Okay. But we have, for the most of the time, met outside of City Hall, and it works better to have a location for a while if you're bouncing back and forth and people don't know where to find. So I like the stability. But I have the office in a suitcase and I print at home. Our first printers were desktop printers, but oh, that's slow. I was printing for 2, 3 days to print enough papers each week. And I'm the epitome of patience. But then we saved our money, raised some money, and bought a laser printer, and that spits them out like a printing press. I office at home and I lay out the paper at home for the most part, and then meet with people to gather their writings. And we've kind of forced people to learn the digital world. I'll type for them at first, and then I'll say, well, this would actually be more accurate if you type it. I'm a really slow typist. Convince them to get at the library and just get on the computer and type it themselves. Even if you're hunting and pecking, it's your voice. I can't make mistake. And I'll help them clarify what they want to say and I'll make changes. So we have like a week or two. That was what irritated me with the other newspaper is he'd be putting that together for a week and it's like, oh, you didn't get to look at it. And when there was some grief poetry that was misspelled, I watched this guy just be crushed at the loss of his friend that he had written about and that it was printed wrong. And if you print 1,000 papers, 2,000 papers, you can't change it. So we print on demand. And if there's an error, oh, we can correct it. And I just put a little star by the date that this is, now it's 2 stars. We've made some changes over 2 weeks, but I wait to get it in the archive until it's all edited. So I've gone out of my way to make sure the voice stays true. Fortunately, our library system, finally, after some years, convinced them that they should have this in each of their libraries. So they subscribe, we get them a deal. So it's all getting archived. As people are becoming more digital, we're selling more digital subscriptions as opposed to mailing them.
I'm sure that's helpful with just building simple skills for people. If people are trying to get a job or anything nowadays, everything's all online.
Exactly, an application. So we're kind of forcing people to jump into we're giving people an opportunity to have some swimming lessons on the digital world. You got your life jacket on, and we're not going to tease you too much because Jesus saves. So save your work. And I'm not a real religious person, but one of the homeless people one time says, well, that's right, Jesus saves. Yes, save your work because Jesus. You don't want to lose that, have it disappear, and have to type it all over again. Keep saving. Yeah. Well, listen. I
All right, so that was that interview with Valerie, and I wanted to end on that note. It's a more positive note, and you can check out their newspaper online at thechallengernewspaper.org, and I think this can be a good blueprint for ways that, regular everyday people can get involved and become that focus point or provide that focus point for homeless community and local house community to kind of come together and coalesce around and reinforce each other. We have to assume that not only is the government not going to be helping marginalized people, but that they may actively weaponize policies against these vulnerable communities. So we need to start acting. It is up to us, everyday people. If the government's not going to do anything to help people like this, it does come down to us, unfortunately. And which I'm not saying anyone has to do anything crazy, and I know we all only have so much energy, and we live in a society where we have to fucking scrape to get by, and you might not even have any time to do anything like this, but, engaging with other newspapers like this, even just subscribing to something like that, or but if you really do want to do something, and you're wondering what you can do locally, just getting engaged with your local homeless community can be a simple thing. You can go through local agencies that already exist, your breadline, and those aren't perfect. None of those things are perfect, but you'll feel better. It's something you can do that's more concrete, and that it's I've heard other people say this, I hear it in the 12-step program, but it's still so true, is it's when we're maybe really looking around at the world around us and worried about how it's going, being selfless, doing something for someone else really will make you feel better, because I try to remind myself that there's a spiritual aspect to the 12-step program, but for me, on that most basic level, it is just being a part of something bigger than myself, because the addiction and all the unhealthy shit is like a descent into myself. It's me trying to fix, manage, and control every little feeling I have and obsessing over those. And the opposite of that is connection, and connecting to that world outside of ourselves. And we can do that in so many different ways. But if you want to get involved with your local homeless community, just talking to them or bringing food to your local camp by you, and I guarantee you, people will be glad to just be treated like a regular human being, because that's all any of us are. Being homeless, you get so fucking used to being treated like a second-class citizen, even subconsciously, by people around you. So really trying to just break down that barrier, and then ask them, see what they need, see what their worries and concerns are, and that's really the best way to try to engage with those communities. And then if you want to go from there and try to set up a meeting place, try to organize locally, even get some form of paper going, or even if you can just report on what's going on in your local homeless community, because while we do get reporting like that all over the country from bigger cities, there's blind spots across the entire country, which is something I'm trying to do with these homeless sweep episodes, which I'm kind of stuck here for the moment. I can't really go around. I put the word out there and I've tried to find out more, but I don't know what's going on in smaller communities all over the U.S. So, see what's happening, report on what's happening. You can let me know, or just people are disappearing off the sidewalk. Let's document this as much as we can so we can understand what's happening to these people. There's been some local deaths in our local homeless community, which I'll get into that in the next episode. It's bunch of fucked up stuff that just happened. But, you know, none of that is really reported on here. So it's like, people need to know that there's people dying out here, because there are people dying out here. Someone just died in a fucking abandoned house fire here in Springfield because of trying to stay warm, and it's the winter. But, you know, that's a direct result of being homeless. And these deaths are avoidable. They don't have to happen. We have enough to go around in this country. So, yeah, I will leave you on that note. It might not be as positive as a note as I said it would be, but, you know, we are not powerless in this, and there are more of us than there are of them. Don't ever forget that. There are more of us than there are of them. And when it really comes down to it, you know, we can get through this. We can get through this together. So everyone just hang in there. Yeah, thank you all for listening. I'll probably be coming out with a short episode relatively soon after this, just about some of this other stuff that I just learned about locally. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I really, really do appreciate it. Stay safe out there. Try not to argue with too many people online. That doesn't get us anywhere. Try not to spend too much time online, but whatever. I'm not your mom. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm terrible at ending these podcasts. Alright, thank you so much for listening. Yeah, stay tuned.